Why? The air inside my parents' house was colder than the wind outside. I walked into Christmas with my kids, carrying a heavy bag. Why? My dad sat in his recliner, ignoring his grandchildren entirely to sneer at me. Everything was peaceful until you showed up, he said. Why? I strangled the shame rising in my throat. I told him calmly, then my money is leaving with me. 5 minutes later he was begging. But right then, why? Standing in that drafty hallway, the war had just begun. Tyler and Emma stood behind me, vibrating with anxiety. At 7 and 9. Why? They shouldn't know how to navigate a minefield, yet here they were. Tyler clutched his handmade card like a shield. Why? The living room looked identical to how I left it 3 years ago, just dustier. Why? The same peeling wallpaper, and the cracked nativity set missing a wise man. Dad refused to fix the draft, claiming it built character. Why? The chill wasn't just physical, it was a pressurized atmosphere of judgment waiting to crush us. Uncle Dan sat on the sofa. Why? Nursing a beer and avoiding eye contact. He gave me a tight nod, the universal signal for, I am staying out of this. My mom was in the kitchen. Why? Wiping the same spot on the counter repeatedly. She looked tired, wearing a sweater that had seen better decades. Nobody moved to greet us. Why? I had come here hoping my recent promotion and stability would finally earn me a seat at the table. Why? I realized instantly how stupid that fragile hope actually was. Dad's eyes narrowed at my retort. He shifted. Why? The leather chair creaking loudly in the silence. What money? He scoffed, trying to sound dismissive, but I heard the greed sharpen his tone. Why? He knew the roof was leaking. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the thick white envelope. It was tied with a red ribbon. Why? Heavy with $10,000 in cash. I held it up. The room went silent, save for the wind rattling the loose window frames. Why? This was for the roof, I said, my voice steady. And the kitchen you promised Mom'd. I watched his face slacken. He started to stand. Why? Hand reaching out, but I didn't hesitate. I ripped the envelope in half. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Why? Gasps erupted from the kitchen. I put the halves together and tore them again. It wasn't about the money anymore. Why? It was about the years of being told I wasn't enough. I let the pieces fall. Hundreds of dollars, 50s, and 20s fluttered down like expensive. Why? Tragic snow. They scattered across the stained beige carpet, creating a chaotic mosaic of green and gray. My mom stepped into the doorway. Why, her hand covering her mouth? Riley, she whispered, looking at the debris. You had that. She hadn't known. Why? Dad had kept them in the dark about my success, so he could keep playing the martyr. Tyler tugged on my hand, his eyes wide. The silence was heavy. Why? Suffocating, and absolutely permanent. I didn't wait for the shock to wear off. I turned on my heel, grabbing Tyler's sweaty hand. Why? We're leaving, I announced, though nobody was trying to stop me yet. Emma was already at the door, her face pale. Why? I felt eyes burning into my back as I marched them past the dusty garland and the cold draft. The air inside felt poisoned. We hit the front porch. Why? The winter wind slapping my face, allowing me to finally breathe. Riley, wait. The voice behind us was rough and desperate. I froze on the top step. Why? In 34 years, my father had never chased me. He was the king, subjects came to him. I turned slowly. He stood there in his socks. Why? Shivering on the concrete. He looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of his armchair and his audience. The wind whipped his thin hair. Why? He wasn't scary out here. He looked pathetic. That realization was terrifying. Don't leave like this, he wheezed, rubbing his arms. Why? The kids shouldn't miss Christmas just because we had a disagreement. I stared at him, incredulous. He was already rewriting history. Why? Humiliating his grandson wasn't a disagreement. It was cruelty. You insulted my son, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Why? You tried to make him feel small to make yourself feel big. He blinked, confused, as if my defiance was a foreign language. Why? He still thought he was in charge. Tyler squeezed my hand so hard his knuckles turned white. I looked down at him. He tried to be brave. Why, but his chin trembled. I looked back at Arthur. You want us to stay? I asked, then apologized to him. Right now. Dad hesitated. Why? I saw the war in his eyes. Pride fighting against the desperation of a leaking roof and a ruined holiday. He looked at the neighbors' windows. Why? Checking for witnesses. He cared more about his reputation than his blood. Finally, Arthur bent down slightly, though he kept his distance. Why? I am sorry, buddy, he said to Tyler. The words were right, but the tone was flat, like he was reading a grocery list. Why? He straightened up and looked at me, expecting a reward. There. Happy? He asked. Now come inside. It's freezing. He reached for my shoulder. Why? Assuming the transaction was complete. He thought a hollow sentence could fix 3 years of silence. He was wrong. I didn't think. Why? My hand moved on its own, driven by a decade of swallowed anger. I slapped him. It wasn't a punch, but it was sharp and loud. Why? His head snapped to the side. The sound cracked through the cold air, louder than the wind. He stumbled back, clutching his cheek. Why? Eyes wide with genuine shock. He looked at me like I had grown a second head. The king had just been struck by the peasant. Why? Don't ever touch my son again, I said. The calm in my voice scared me. I ushered the kids into the car, buckling them in. Arthur didn't move. Why? He stood on the porch, hand on his face, frozen in the spot where I struck him. As I backed out of the driveway, I watched him in the rearview mirror. Why? He wasn't chasing us anymore. For the first time, I wasn't the one running away. I was simply moving on. The silence in my house was heavy. Why? Broken only by the incessant buzzing of my phone. 9 missed calls. 5 voicemails. I didn't listen to a single one. I just stared at the screen. Why? Watching Dad's name flash like a warning light before deleting everything. Tyler and Emma were still asleep. Why? Curled under the weighted blanket in the living room fort we built at 2 a.m. They looked peaceful, but I knew the storm wasn't over. Why? It was just gathering strength. Around noon, a heavy knock echoed through the hallway. My stomach dropped. I checked the peephole. Why? Half expecting to see Arthur with a shotgun or a lawyer. Instead, it was Uncle Dan. He stood on the porch in a thick parka. Why? Holding a grease-stained paper bag. I opened the door cautiously. He looked like a man who had just walked away from a car crash. Why? His eyes were red, rimmed and tired. He didn't say hello. Can I come in? He asked quietly. I stepped back to let him enter. Why? He stomped the snow off his boots and handed me the bag. Leftover cookies, he muttered. Nobody had an appetite. We stood in the kitchen. Why? The hum of the refrigerator filling the space between us. They're freaking out, Riley. Your dad sat in that chair for 3 hours after you left. I didn't speak. Just stared at the wall. I felt a flicker of guilt, but I crushed it. Good, I said. Why? He needed to think. Dan leaned against the counter, shaking his head slowly. I should have said something years ago, he admitted. Why? His voice rough. Watching him treat you like that. Watching him treat that little boy like that. He looked me in the eye, his expression serious. Why? That slap. He earned it. The whole room knew it. Brianna actually texted me saying it was the best Christmas she's ever seen. A short, why? Bitter laugh escaped my throat. It felt foreign. The validation was intoxicating. Why? Dan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something flat and crumpled. It was Tyler's card. The snowman drawing was bent. Why? And there was a faint shoe print across the corner. But the "I love you, Grandpa" was still legible. Your dad dropped it, Dan said softly. Why? He didn't pick it up. I did. I took the paper, smoothing the wrinkles with my thumb. The crayon wax felt waxy and cool. Why? Seeing the footprint made my blood boil all over again. I thought maybe he'd want it. I lied, staring at the ruined drawing. Why? Maybe this is a wake-up call. Dan moved closer, his hand gripping my shoulder with surprising strength. Don't do that, he warned. Why? Don't convince yourself he's going to change. He's not sad, Riley. He's humiliated. There is a difference. The warning hung in the air, why heavy and dark. I looked up at him, startled. Family usually patches things up. Dan was handing me a weapon instead of a bandage. I nodded slowly. Why? Accepting the truth. The guilt that had been nagging at me finally evaporated, replaced by cold clarity. Why? I walked over to the fireplace and placed the crumpled card on the mantel, right next to our own stocking. It looked better here. Safer. Thanks. Why? Dan, I said. He buttoned his coat, ready to face the cold again. Watch your back, he said as he opened the door. He's quiet now. Why? But snakes always coil before they strike. Darkness settled over the neighborhood by 5 o'clock, turning the piles of snow into gray lumps. Inside, why? The only light came from the Christmas tree, and my phone screen pulsing rhythmically on the kitchen island. I had silenced the device hours ago. Why? But the visual notification was hard to ignore. Mom, flashed across the glass in bright white letters. It wasn't a call this time. Why? It was a long block of text. She hates direct confrontation, preferring to hide behind screens. I unlocked the screen. Why? Bracing myself for the inevitable guilt trip. Dad wants to talk. The message began. He thinks things got out of hand last night and wants to clear the air so we can move forward as a family. I read it twice. Why? Looking for the magic words. They weren't there. No apology. No admission of fault. Why? Just passive phrases like situations and misunderstandings. It was a masterclass in rewriting history. According to her, the chaos just happened. Why? The second half of the message was the hook intended to snag my sympathy. We're under a lot of stress with the money problems and the roof leaking. Why? You know how your father gets when he's worried. Please, Riley. Don't let this ruin everything. The audacity took my breath away. Why? She was using the very financial struggle I had tried to fix and was rejected for as the excuse for why they abused me. It was a perfect why? Toxic loop. 3 years ago, I would have called back immediately. I would have apologized for my part in the drama, just to smooth the waters. Why? I would have driven back over there to fix the mood, sacrificing my dignity to keep the peace. But looking at those glowing blue letters now, why? I didn't feel the usual pull. I didn't feel the heavy weight of obligation or the desperate need to be understood. I just felt tired. It was pathetic. Why? My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I could type a furious rebuttal. Why? I could explain exactly why. How he gets wasn't a valid legal defense for cruelty. I could demand she acknowledge the slap. Why? But that is what they wanted. Engagement. Any response, even anger, was fuel for their fire. I lowered my hand. I didn't type a single letter. Why? Instead, I held the power button down until the screen went black. The silence that followed was absolute bliss. Why? I walked into the living room where the real Christmas was happening. Why? Tyler and Emma had constructed an elaborate fortress out of sofa cushions and every blanket we owned. They were giggling, eating popcorn. Why? And watching a movie on the tablet propped up inside. They didn't miss their grandfather. Why? They weren't asking about the peaceful house we left behind. They were safe here. Why? The tension that had lived in my shoulders for a decade finally released its tight grip. I crawled into the fort with them. Why? Accepting a handful of buttery popcorn from Emma. For the first time, I realized I didn't actually need my parents' approval to be an adult. Why? I was already doing it. I was the dad I wished I had. I closed my eyes, listening to the movie, feeling victorious. Why? But while I found peace inside my own walls, I should have known better than to think Arthur would accept silence. Silence, to him, was war. Why? The next morning felt deceptively normal. The sun was bright, reflecting off the snow with a blinding intensity that promised a headache. Why? I kissed the kids goodbye, leaving them with the babysitter so I could head into the office for a half day. I grabbed my travel mug. Why? Stepping out onto the front porch, keys in hand. The cold air bit at my cheeks. I looked toward the driveway and froze. Why? My coffee mug slipped from my gloved fingers, shattering on the concrete. My 12-year-old sedan was unrecognizable. Why? The windshield wasn't just cracked, it was obliterated. Spiderwebs of safety glass caught the sunlight. Why? With a gaping hole right in the center, where something heavy had impacted repeatedly. Shards of glass littered the hood like diamonds on a corpse. Why? It wasn't an accident or weather damage. This was rage made physical. It was a message. I walked closer, crunching snow under my boots. Why? Feeling the violation settle deep in my stomach like a stone. I circled the car, my breath hitching in clouds of white vapor. Why? The side mirror was hanging by a wire, dangling like a broken limb. Then I saw the mailbox. It had been kicked off its post. Why? Lying sideways in a drift of snow, dented by a heavy boot. I knew that kick. I had seen Arthur kick doors, walls, and furniture my entire childhood. Why? The police might call this vandalism, but I knew exactly what it was. It was a tantrum. My dad had always been loud. He threw words like grenades. Why? Designed to hurt, but he had never crossed the line into physical destruction before. This was a severe escalation. Why? It meant the slap had broken something fundamental in his wiring. He wasn't just angry, he was unhinged. I looked around the quiet suburban street. Why? Wondering if he was still watching. I wondered if he was waiting for me to call him in a panic, begging for it to stop. Why? Fear tried to claw its way up my throat, but another emotion quickly overtook it. Calculation. I stared at the wreckage. Why? Realizing he expected me to react with emotion. He expected me to cry or scream. Why? My eyes drifted past the ruined car to the porch eave above my front door. Tucked away in the shadow was a small black circle. Why? The doorbell camera I installed back in October to catch teenage pranksters. I had forgotten to take it down. Why? My heart stopped racing and settled into a slow, heavy thud. I hadn't checked the app in weeks, but the little blue light was steady. Why? It was recording. It was always recording. Arthur was a man of the 20th century. He doesn't think about cloud storage or motion sensors. Why? He thinks darkness is a cover. He thought this was a private act of revenge, a secret punishment for a disobedient son. Why? He didn't know he had just performed for an audience. The fear evaporated completely, replaced by a cold, grim satisfaction. Why? I didn't reach for the broom to clean up the glass. I didn't call the insurance company. Not yet. I turned around and walked back into the house. Why? my boots leaving wet prints on the hardwood floor. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the security app. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Why? I wasn't a victim staring at a tragedy. I was a prosecutor staring at a conviction. I sat at the kitchen island. Why? My phone lying flat on the cold granite. The footage loaded with a spinning wheel before snapping into harsh clarity. It was 3:14 a.m. Why? The figure walked into the frame, breath puffing in the night vision green. It was unmistakably Arthur. He wore his distinctive hunting jacket. Why? The one with the frayed collar. He looked around nervously, checking the silent houses, before raising a tire iron. He swung with a vicious, why? Silent intent that made my stomach turn over. The glass on the screen exploded in a shower of digital pixels. He didn't stop at one hit. Why? He struck 3 times, ensuring the damage was total. Then, as he turned to leave, he saw the mailbox standing upright. Why? He kicked it with a childish fury, sending it toppling into the snow. He jogged away, looking over his shoulder like a common thief. Why? Watching it felt voyeuristic. It stripped away the last layer of my denial. This wasn't a father teaching a lesson, this was a petty criminal. Why? I didn't hesitate this time. I dialed the non-emergency line, my voice sounding robotic in the empty kitchen. I reported vandalism. Why? I didn't mention names yet. I just gave the facts, keeping my emotions locked in a tight box. 10 minutes later, why? A cruiser pulled up silently to the curb, lights off. Officer Hayes stepped out. I knew her from town meetings. She was sharp, professional. Why? And had never bought into my father's pillar of the community act. She surveyed the glass with a critical eye. Hayes crunched across the driveway. Why? Taking photos with a tablet. Nasty work, she commented, kneeling to inspect the tire iron dent on the hood. Why? Neighbors didn't hear this. I shook my head, explaining the cold kept everyone's windows shut tight. She stood up, brushing snow off her pant leg. Why? Any enemies, Riley? Disgruntled employees. Ex-partners. She looked at me, pen poised over her notebook. The question hung in the air. I could lie.
Why?
I could protect him one last time. I looked at the shattered glass. I have it on video, I said. I handed her my phone. Why? Hayes watched the clip in silence, her expression tightening. She replayed it once, zooming in on the face. Is that Arthur? She asked. Why? Though she clearly knew the answer. That's your father, isn't it? The confirmation felt like vomiting. Yes, I said. Why? That is my father. The air between us changed instantly. It wasn't a property dispute anymore. It was domestic violence. Why? Hayes looked at me with a new, intense gravity that made me flinch. She handed the phone back, her jaw set. This is clear-cut, Riley. Why? Criminal mischief, vandalism, trespassing. The value of that windshield pushes it out of minor territory. She adjusted her belt. Why? Looking toward the end of the street where my parents lived. I can go over there right now. We can pick him up. She paused. Why? Waiting for the flinch I usually had. She expected me to back down. To ask for a warning. To say he was just stressed. She expected the son. Why, not the man? Do you want to press charges? Hayes asked the question that would detonate my family. If I said no, he wins. Why? He learns that he can destroy my property and humiliate my son without consequence. If I said yes, I became the son who put his dad in jail. Why? I looked at the house where my children were sleeping safely. They deserved a father who stood up to bullies. Absolutely, I said. Why? The word tasted like iron. I want full restitution and I want him arrested immediately. Hayes nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. Why? Good, she said firmly. He doesn't get to walk away from this. She began typing into her onboard computer. Why? I am going to request an immediate warrant. With this video, the judge won't hesitate. She looked back at the footage still paused on my screen. Why? You need to know something, Riley. The DA will push this hard. They don't like it when domestic disputes spill into the street. She hesitated, why biting her lip, debating whether to say more. Why? I asked. Hayes sighed, lowering her voice. Why? This isn't the first time his name has come up in our system. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? She glanced at her notes. Why? We have 2 prior reports of aggressive outbursts. A neighbor dispute over a fence 3 years ago, and an incident at a grocery store last year. Why? No charges were filed, but the notes are there. Anger issues. The world tilted. I wasn't the special victim. Why? I was just the latest one in a long line. We didn't know. I whispered. Mom had hidden it well. Hayes closed her notebook with a snap. Well, why? It's public record now. Stay here. Don't go over there. We will handle the pickup. She got back into her cruiser. The engine roared to life. Why? Exhaust puffing into the cold air. As she drove toward my parents' house, I realized the family secret wasn't that I was a failure. Why? The secret was that Arthur was a monster, and I had just handed the police the key to his cage. Officer Hayes called me 40 minutes later. Why? Her voice was clipped and official, devoid of the earlier sympathy. It's done, she said. He resisted at first. Why? Tried to tell us it was a private family matter. I gripped the phone, imagining Arthur standing on his porch, shouting at uniforms. Why? Realizing his authority held no currency with the law. He was booked into county processing immediately. No special treatment. Why? No. Good old boy handshake. The king had officially been dethroned. I thanked her and hung up, staring at the blank wall. Why? The arraignment happened fast. Because of the clear video evidence and the aggressive nature of the vandalism, the district attorney didn't play nice. Why? They slapped him with criminal mischief and vandalism charges, pushing for maximum penalties. Why? 7 days in county jail and full financial restitution. It wasn't a life sentence, but for a man like Arthur, it was the apocalypse. Why? He had to wear the orange jumpsuit. He had to sit in a cell. The humiliation was the real sentence, and it was crushing him. Why? The news traveled faster than the legal paperwork. By evening, my phone began to vibrate, dancing across the coffee table like a possessed object. Why? It started with Mom. Her messages were frantic, misspelled streams of consciousness. How could you? He's your father. Why? You are killing him. She didn't mention the tire iron. She didn't mention the fear my children might have felt if they had been in that car. Why? She only saw the handcuffs. To her, I was the villain who called the cops, not the victim. Then the extended cavalry arrived. Why? Aunts I hadn't spoken to in a decade suddenly had strong opinions on my moral character. Family doesn't do this. My Aunt Linda texted. Why? You resolve things at the table, not in court. I laughed bitterly at the screen. The table where I was mocked. Why? The table where my son was made to feel small. Why? They wanted me to swallow the glass shards of my windshield, just to keep their uncomfortable family dinners polite. Why? Their definition of peace was just silent suffering. I started blocking numbers. It became a rhythmic, satisfying motion. Swipe left, tap block. Why swipe left, tap block? Why? Cousin Brianna sent a long paragraph about hurt pride and how Arthur was just stressed about the roof. They were all reading from the same script. Why? They acted like he had accidentally bumped my fender, not maliciously destroyed my property with a weapon. In law. Why? They were protecting the abuser, because it was easier than admitting their patriarch was a violent, unstable man. I deleted them all without replying. Why? The isolation should have felt lonely, but it felt like cleaning a wound. I sat in the living room, watching the numbers dwindle. Why? Every blocked contact was a chain falling off my wrists. I realized that this family was just a cult of personality built around Arthur's ego. Why? If membership required me to let him terrorize me, then I didn't want to pay the dues anymore. I checked on the kids. They were playing video games. Lie. Completely unaware that their grandfather was currently sitting in a holding cell. A new notification popped up, but it wasn't a family member. Why? It was a direct message on social media from a woman named Sarah. The profile picture showed a neighbor who lived 2 houses down from my parents. Why? I heard what happened. She wrote. I braced myself for more judgment, hovering my thumb over the delete button. Why? I just wanted to say thank you. I stared at the words, confused. The message bubbles danced as she typed more. Why? He poisoned my dog 4 years ago. I read the message 3 times. He told everyone my dog got into antifreeze. Sarah continued. Why? But I saw him throw meat over the fence. I was too scared to say anything. He's so loud, you know. Why? I am glad someone finally stopped him. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just temper tantrums. It was malice. Why? Arthur wasn't a grumpy old man. He was a predator who preyed on the weak. My guilt vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, hard nausea. Why? I replied to Sarah, thanking her for telling me. It validated everything Officer Hayes had hinted at. I wasn't destroying the family. Why? I was exposing the rot that had been there for decades. The stress Mom cited was a lie. The money problems were a distraction. Why? Arthur was simply a man who enjoyed hurting things that couldn't fight back. Well, I could fight back. I had fought back. And now, why? The entire neighborhood knew that the Emperor wasn't just naked, he was dangerous. By midnight, the phone finally stopped buzzing. Why? The silence in my house was profound. It wasn't the tense silence of my childhood, waiting for a door to slam. It was the silence of safety. Why? I walked to the window and looked out at my empty driveway. The shattered glass was gone, swept away by my own hands. The car was in the shop. Why? The bad man was in jail. I locked the front door, turned off the porch light, and went upstairs to sleep. New Year's Eve arrived with a biting frost. Why? But the sun was finally out. I spent the morning in the driveway, fitting the new side mirror onto the sedan. The mechanic had fixed the windshield. Why? But I wanted to do the smaller repairs myself. It felt necessary. My hands were numb, grease staining my knuckles, but the work grounded me. Why? I tightened the last bolt, testing the plastic casing. It held firm. I wiped a smudge off the glass. The car looked whole again. Why? Erasing the last physical evidence of Arthur's tantrum. I stood back, admiring the repair work. A week ago, why? This damage would have sent me into a spiral of panic and shame. Why? I would have begged for forgiveness for a crime I didn't commit just to stop the yelling. Now, staring at the clean reflection in the glass, why? I felt nothing but a quiet resolve. The fear that had dictated my life for 4 years was simply gone. It hadn't been conquered. Why? It had been starved. I realized I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. I had thrown the shoes away. Inside, why? The house smelled of cinnamon and heated air. Tyler and Emma were at the kitchen table, wearing paper hats from a party popper set. Why? Tyler was drawing again. He wasn't hunched over in survival mode, like he was at my parents' house. He was sprawled out, humming a tune. Why? Taking up space. He looked up and smiled, a gap-toothed grin that reached his eyes. Look, Dad, he said, holding up a new picture. Why? It was a superhero with a shield. It's you, he stated simply. I took the drawing, my throat tightening. It wasn't perfect art, but it was honest. Why? I walked over to the fireplace. The crumpled snowman card from Christmas Eve was still there, next to the stocking. Why? I placed the superhero drawing right beside it. One was a monument to who I used to be. The desperate son seeking approval. Why? The other was who I was now. The father who protected his own. I didn't need to be Arthur's son anymore. I just needed to be Tyler and Emma's dad. I sat in the armchair watching them play. The lie I had believed for decades whispered that I was broken. Why? A screw-up who needed to buy love with $10,000 envelopes. The truth was quieter but stronger. Why? I was the only one who had actually built a real home. My money, my dignity, and my children were safe because I had finally drawn the line. Why? I wasn't a failure for leaving my parents behind. I was a survivor for getting my children out. That was enough. The clock ticked toward midnight. Why? Marking the end of the hardest year of my life. My phone remained silent, still on Do Not Disturb. Why? Blocking out the noise of a family that never really loved me. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger. Why? It was gratitude. I was glad he smashed the windshield. I was glad he screamed. Why? It took a disaster to burn down the bridge I never should have crossed. I closed my eyes, finally, truly at peace.